Normally when we talk about risk in financial markets, there is this expectation that everything fits neatly into a specific category.
Right, like you have your blue chip equities over here and your sovereign treasury bonds over there.
Exactly. And your speculative tech bets are just kind of off to the side.
Mm.
It's supposed to be this stable foundation where capital allocates based on very predictable models.
The whole traditional risk-on versus risk-off binary. I mean, the economy grows, money flows into equities, fear spikes, it runs to government bonds. That has literally been the plumbing of global finance for decades.
But then you step into the reality of global logistics and active warfare, and suddenly that foundation just cracks.
It completely shatters.
Right. So welcome to the week that was. For those of you joining us, our mission today is to unpack a deep dive into a series of events defined by what we can really only call kinetic macroeconomics.
We're watching global military escalation, fracturing supply chains, and, historic energy shocks basically collide all at once.
And right in the middle of all this friction, the world's primary digital asset is transforming. We're witnessing a profound psychological shift in real time.
An asset that Wall Street basically viewed as this highly volatile tech stock for its entire existence is now being utilized by sovereign states as a lifeboat.
Yeah, as a hedge against the collapse of maritime security. And, well, the failure of that traditional 60-40 portfolio we were just talking about.
Absolutely.
But before we dig into the actual data, I want to frame how we are approaching this for you, the listener. The sources for this deep dive cover some highly charged political and military events. We were talking about U.S. leadership, domestic politics, and international adversaries.
And we should be very clear here.
Yes. Our goal today is not to take political sides or endorse any specific administration's worldview. We are here purely to analyze the reported facts and, the cold, hard math of how these events impact the macro trends.
Because the math is what dictates the market reaction. And to understand that reaction, we actually have to start with the physical world, which had a catastrophic failure in maritime security this week.
A total breakdown. I mean, the numbers are just staggering.
They really are. We saw direct strikes on the Bapco Energy's Citra refinery in Bahrain. To put that in perspective for you, that facility processes 405,000 barrels of oil every single day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the tactics are shifting too. Iraq's southern oil terminals had to fully suspend operations because commercial tankers were struck by underwater drones.
Which is a complete game changer, right? An aerial drone can be intercepted by a destroyer, but an underwater drone.
Exactly. The maritime insurance premiums just skyrocket because actuaries, they literally can't price the risk of an invisible underwater threat.
The desperation is so intense that commercial ships are resorting to these raw signaling games. You actually have tankers altering their transponder data to broadcast the words China owner just to secure safe passage.
It's like a real-world application of game theory, just hoping the attackers won't want to anger the region's biggest oil buyer.
And meanwhile, the U.S. response operation Epic Fury has escalated into this massive campaign. We're talking B-1 and B-2 stealth bombers.
And a mounting human toll, sadly. The Pentagon confirmed 140 U.S. service members wounded, alongside the really tragic loss of 6 airmen in a KC-135 Stratotanker crash.
It's incredibly heavy. Yet, within all of that kinetic action, the Kharg Island strike reveals a very calculated strategy by the U.S.
Right, because Kharg Island is essentially the crown jewel of the Iranian energy export network.
Exactly. U.S. forces obliterated the military targets there, but they deliberately left the oil loading docks completely intact.
And the mechanics of that restraint are so crucial to understand. If you destroy those docks, you aren't just sending a political message. You are physically carving millions of barrels out of the global market instantly.
You trigger a mathematical supply deficit.
Right. Brent crude would go parabolic, well past $100 a barrel. They are trying to degrade the military without causing a total economic collapse.
But the political reality on the ground seems entirely detached from that surgical approach. Intelligence shows the Iranian regime isn't facing collapse. Their new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is in a bunker directing broadcasts, vowing to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed.
So the supply chain stays constricted.
Right. I like to think of the global supply chain as this fragile nervous system that just suffered a paralyzing trauma. The pain signals are instantly transmitted right to the energy markets.
And because that physical flow is choked off, governments are backed into a corner. They are forced into these desperate policy maneuvers that are permanently altering the macroeconomic landscape.
Because, you can't just print oil, right?
Exactly. You only have 2 levers: liquidate your reserves or change your trade laws. And right now, we are seeing both levers pulled hard. We just witnessed a historic release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve,
400 million barrels globally.
with the U.S. alone contributing 172 million barrels, which drives domestic stockpiles down to 40-year lows.
The domestic situation is so tense that the White House is actually debating a 30-day waiver of the Jones Act. For anyone unfamiliar, that's a century-old law requiring cargo moved between U.S. ports to be on U.S.-built and crewed ships.
And suspending that requires a national defense exception. You usually only see that when a Category 5 hurricane wipes out the Gulf Coast.
So waiving it now just screams systemic distress. And this physical distress feeds directly into the trap the Federal Reserve is caught in. Q4 GDP growth was just revised down to a mere 0.7%.
Growth is flatlining, but inflation is mathematically guaranteed to accelerate because of this energy shock. The Fed is literally paralyzed.
Right. They can't raise rates without triggering a debt crisis to finance all these military deployments, and they can't cut them because of supply-side inflation. But let me push back on this SPR release for a second. If the U.S. is flooding the market with 172 million barrels, the physical infrastructure dictates the discharge cycle only lasts about 120 days. So aren't we just essentially putting a Band-Aid on it and guaranteeing an even more violent supply cliff by late summer?
Yes, that is exactly the mechanism. It is a 120-day liquidity bridge over a structural deficit. Once it stops flowing, the market hits a wall. And compounding this, we are seeing major shifts away from globalization entirely.
Like the U.S. Trade Representative launching Section 301 probes into 60 economies.
Right, which allows the U.S. to unilaterally impose tariffs. When you apply that to 60 economies simultaneously, you are basically taxing the entire global supply chain. It raises baseline import costs across the board.
And as the U.S. does that, other nations are building bypasses. We saw the formal emergence of the Petroyuan this week. Iran and China are settling energy trades in yuan, completely bypassing the SWIFT system and the U.S. dollar,
which fractures the foundational petrodollar system. So because traditional central banking tools are utterly powerless against this kind of supply-side shock, we are seeing a totally asymmetric financial response.
This is the fascinating part. Global legacy markets panicked. The Nikkei 225 dropped 6.5%. But Bitcoin absorbed the shock.
It bounced off this algorithmically driven floor around $65,500, pushed past $70,000, and established a structural breakout above $71,800.
The institutional inflows are staggering. The U.S. spot ETF complex pulled in over $763 million in a single week.
With BlackRock's IBIT fund completely dominating the capital absorption, they're sequestering vastly more Bitcoin than the network's daily emission of 450 coins.
But this isn't just organic appetite, right? There's a massive bureaucratic breakthrough fueling this.
Oh, absolutely. The SEC and the CFTC finally formalized a Memorandum of Understanding for Substituted Compliance and Cross-Margining.
Okay, let's clarify that for the listener. What does that treaty actually mean? Is this essentially the U.S. government finally integrating this asset into the core plumbing of Wall Street?
That is exactly what it is. It ends duplicative rules. A multi-billion-dollar hedge fund can now hold a Bitcoin ETF, hand it to a Tier 1 bank as collateral, and use those borrowed dollars to trade traditional equity futures.
Wow. And we are seeing massive corporate accumulation, too. Strategy Inc. just executed a $1.28 billion purchase of nearly 18,000 Bitcoin. Their average price was around $70,946.
Which totally debunks those rumors going around retail circles about executives dumping their share.
Right, people were panicking, but those were just automated, non-discretionary sales under Rule 10b5-1 plans to cover tax withholding events.
The algorithm executes blindly. It doesn't care about market sentiment. And as Wall Street integrates the asset, the underlying infrastructure securing the network is undergoing this radical, multi-billion-dollar maturation process.
And the divergence in corporate strategy is wild. Over in Japan, Metaplanet is pivoting into a modern shadow bank.
Yeah, they launched a $25 million venture arm. They are integrating with the fiat-pegged JPYC stablecoin, and they're aiming to hoard 210,000 Bitcoin.
But then you look at the actual miners, and they are pivoting in a completely different direction. Core Scientific just secured $1 billion from Morgan Stanley.
But not from mining. They are converting their power infrastructure into AI data centers, and they are liquidating over 2,500 Bitcoin to fund the transition.
It's like an industrial salvage operation. The physical infrastructure of Bitcoin mining is so incredibly valuable that it basically serves as a foundational floor for the entire AI industry.
And the economics are forcing this. Mining difficulty just hit an all-time high of 146.4 trillion. It pushes the average production cost to nearly $38,000 per coin.
A cost that will only rise, especially with South Korea establishing a legal price floor for critical minerals.
Exactly. And while the hardware layer consolidates, the financial products are evolving. BlackRock just introduced their new iShares Staked Ethereum Trust, or ETHB.
Effectively creating the first internet-native bond.
Right. It yields 3.1 to 4% delivered directly into legacy brokerage accounts.
But, and this is a big but for you listening, while institutional adoption hardens, the bridge between traditional finance and this decentralized architecture is still full of unregulated traps.
Oh, the dark forest is real. We saw a $50 million tuition payment on-chain this week.
Break down that slippage disaster for us.
An unidentified user tried to swap over $50 million in USDT for AAVE tokens in a single transaction on a decentralized front end, but the liquidity pool only had $73,000 in it.
You can't push $50 million through a $73,000 hose.
No, it triggered a 99% price impact. And predatory sandwich bots instantly saw the flawed trade in the mempool and siphoned over $44 million in value from the user.
Just instantly vanished. Which makes me want to push back on this whole ecosystem. How can an asset be considered a pristine global reserve if the infrastructure required to trade it is essentially a dark forest filled with algorithmic predators?
It is a totally valid concern, and there is a looming systemic legal risk, too. The massive class action lawsuit against Tether, the USDT issuer, is moving into the discovery phase in New York.
Raising the specter of a total liquidity vacuum if offshore markets discover the stablecoin is unbacked.
Exactly.
So synthesizing all of this for the listener, across the week that was, this was the week the market stopped treating Bitcoin like a tech stock and started treating it like a lifeboat.
Supply chains are fracturing, energy is soaring, and the petrodollar is facing systemic bypass.
Algorithmic scarcity is acting as the ultimate mathematical sanctuary against fiat debasement.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. The National Bank of Kazakhstan just announced it is moving $700 million from its gold and foreign currency reserves into Bitcoin.
Wow.
Yeah. If mid-sized nations are already playing game theory to escape a collapsing dollar system, what happens when a major Western power realizes they must do the exact same thing just to guarantee their own energy imports?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives you see in the headlines, look at the underlying math, and we will catch you next time.